Greetings, everyone. My name is Lisa Bidwin. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Council of Churches, and so excited to have Phil Coupe with us today from Revision Energy. He is going to be sharing with us solar energy for churches, schools, and nonprofits. Most importantly, he's going to be providing us an important update on the recent scorching of the subsidies for solar that have happened at the federal level. Let me tell you a little bit about Phil. He is the co-founder and aspirational visionary that began Revision Energy. He focuses on key partnerships and community relationships, business strategy, and the long-term national security implications of our over-reliance on finite fossil fuels. Prior to the launch of Revision Energy, Phil worked as a journalist in Washington, D.C., before helping start up a business that twice made the 500 list of fastest growing companies in America. To match business growth with purpose, Phil immersed himself in the early movement toward corporate social responsibility and socially responsible business practices, leading the startup to win awards for its community-focused program that invested in solutions to homelessness, at-risk youth, and environmental degradation. Phil, warm welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to let you just slip right into your presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lisa. It's nice to be here today. And I just start with a couple words about Revision Energy. We started out with basically two people in a garage in 2003 with the goal of bringing solar kind of out of the backwoods hippie realm and into the mainstream. And in the past 23 years now, 22 years, we've grown to about 400 people across our 6 locations in northern New England. We have 2 decarbonization facilities in Maine, 2 of our facilities in New Hampshire, and 2 more down in Massachusetts. Since we started the company, we feel like we've accomplished a few things. We've now actually installed more than 20,000 clean energy systems across the 3 northernmost states of New England. Included amongst those projects are about 234 projects for schools, nonprofits, and municipalities. And we started doing those types of projects really in earnest in about in the year 2010, when we did our first nonprofit kind of school-based project for Goodwill Hinckley School in Fairfield, Maine, for at-risk disadvantaged youth. And one of the key aspects of these projects for nonprofits is that we do them at zero upfront cost to the nonprofit, recognizing that nonprofit budgets are annually challenging, and it's hard to come up with capital to do big projects. And so we have devised a special program that uses a technique called a power purchase agreement to enable nonprofits to go forward with solar without having to spend any money out of pocket or out of their capital budgets. In the school church-based realm, we've done a few dozen different churches in northern New England. I'll highlight a few here in New Hampshire, beginning with the Guilford Community Church in Guilford, New Hampshire, that we did in 2021. This particular solar array covers roughly 80% of the annual electricity needs of the entire church and all the extra buildings that you see there. And this project has reduced the church's electricity or utility costs by more than 50% per year. And I have a little quote from Warren Hutchins, who's a member of the church and also the solar project lead. And Warren says, "Reducing expenses enables us to repurpose member pledges from invoices for electricity over to support our local community." And so that's kind of like, that's really the key here that we see to these types of projects, which is helping the nonprofit or the religious organization save its precious resources so that it can do its community work rather than spending more and more money every year on electricity and heating and cooling costs. Another good example of one of these projects was done at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church up in New London. This particular project has reduced electricity usage from the utility and reduced costs by about 46% per year. And there's a nice piece of feedback that we received from Father Jay McLeod saying that this project is a win-win for us. We're going to save a huge amount of money on our electric bill, and just as important, we're going to lower our carbon footprint. And of course, saving money is an incredibly important objective, but also we are trying to protect God's creation here in being more gentle on the earth and recognizing the fact that today we have 8 billion people burning fossil fuels in Earth's closed atmosphere. So anything and everything that we can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is incredibly worthwhile, and more so as time goes by and our energy consumption continues to go up around the globe and in New England. And then more recently, at Bedford Presbyterian Church, we did a really exciting project. This system, you can see, is actually located on the ground of the church and not on the roof. And one of the big reasons for that is we really oversized this project because the church has a long-term plan to get completely off of fossil fuel related energy. And so this solar array is actually producing pretty much double the amount of solar electricity needed by the church each year to meet its electricity demand. And so the extra 50% of surplus energy is going to actually go towards the future installation of air source heat pumps for heating and cooling the church and allowing them to eliminate liquid fossil fuels. I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty here in that my screen went dark on me. There we go. And so what I love about the Bedford Presbyterian Church project is that it cuts their annual electricity costs by about 86% per year. It's going to save them $15,000 in utility costs annually, and it's going to enable that long-term switch away from fossil fuels for heating and cooling and move over to air source heat pumps. So these are 3 great examples of the power of what we call these power purchase agreements to enable a nonprofit to access cost-effective solar energy without taking money out of their budget and letting the energy savings from the project actually pay for the cost of installation over the 25 to 40 year expected useful lifespan of a project. And I can say that with a straight face because these solar arrays, they come with a 25-year warranty on the power output of the solar panels, which is the kind of the most important part of the panel is what you're going to derive from it annually. And so you have a 25-year warranty on the technology and a 40+ year expected useful lifespan. We actually have solar arrays in New England that are now 50 years old, still producing about 80% of what they did on day one. So this is a very robust, long-lived technology that can survive and perform very well, even in a relatively harsh climate like we have here in northern New England. Now let's talk about the key driver of the economic and environmental return on investment that we get from these solar arrays. And that key driver is the energy source that powers the array. Before I dive down into the specifics for New England, let's just look at the kind of the global energy picture for humans and look at it from the perspective of the relative abundance of known sources to humankind. So we're looking at the work of an energy researcher named Dr. Richard Perez out of the State University of New York system. And what he's showing us here is in the lower left of the graphic, that little blue marble where it says consumption, that is meant to represent volumetrically all of the energy that humankind needs on an annual basis on planet Earth. And so the size of all the other spheres on the graphic are roughly in relation to their ability to meet that annual demand here on Earth. So on the right-hand side of the ledger, you've got the finite resources of natural gas, petroleum, uranium, and coal. And we can see on the size of each sphere that they're more than big enough for now to meet that global energy demand. However, we know that those fossil fuels are both finite and pretty terribly negatively impacting the environment with their with their greenhouse gases and all the drilling and fracking activities that go on with them. And then on the left-hand side of the ledger, the renewable energy side, we basically see that there are two spheres big enough to meet global energy demand. You see the wind sphere up there at the top, and then this giant yellow sun in the middle. And why is the sun rendered so large? Well, even from 98 million miles away, the sun is delivering an almost incomprehensible amount of energy to the surface of the earth on an annual basis, on a daily basis, and even on an hourly basis. And the takeaway from this slide is that in 1 hour, the sun is delivering enough energy to the surface of the earth to power all human energy demand for an entire year. It's just a staggering amount of energy. And frankly, this is why Revision Energy is in the solar business. It's because solar is simply the most abundant energy resource available to humankind. And it's also pretty much the cheapest that's ever been seen in the history of humankind. If we now narrow the aperture down to our region here in northern New England, I think it's really important to address kind of the counterintuitive fact that we have a much stronger solar resource than most people would assume. A lot of folks think it's too far north here in our region for solar to be viable and that it's too cold. Well, the reality, if you can look at the yellow line here, the reality is that our latitude in northern New England is identical to Monaco on the French Riviera, which is in a very famously sunny location on planet Earth, the south of France and the north of Spain. This is a year-round kind of resort or vacation area because they don't get cold wintertime temperatures like we do in New England. And that's because we have Gulf Stream winds that pull Arctic temperatures down through our region to give us those cold winter temperatures. The great news is not only do we have a good solar resource because of our latitude, but also solar panels are much more efficient the lower the temperature it is outside. And so when it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 degrees in brilliant sunshine in New England, we're actually getting a higher yield from a solar panel than we would from a sunnier but hotter region of the world, like say, the Arizona desert, for example. And I'll address that again in another slide. But let me touch briefly on the reason that I've circled Germany on this image, which is, first of all, I want to illustrate how much further north Germany is. But the other thing I want to highlight is the fact that Germany, for the last 40 years, has been frantically trying to get off of fossil fuels because they know that the major supplier of gas and oil to Western Europe is Russia. And since Russia has invaded Ukraine 2.5 years ago or so, Russia has drastically reduced, if not completely cut off, gas and oil supplies to Europe. And so Germany, for more than 4 decades, has been trying to wean itself off of fossil fuels, and they've made some astonishing progress. They've now reached a situation where on days where the sun is shining bright and the wind is blowing strong, they're brushing up against 100% renewables without having to burn coal, oil, and gas for their energy needs. This is not yet year-round for Germany, but they're actually decades ahead of us in New England. And the takeaway from this slide for us is that because our latitude is much better, we get about 30% more sunshine per year than Germany. And yet we can see how much they've accomplished in decades of investments in renewables. And that return on investment really became evident in 2024, when for the first time in history, wind and solar electricity contributed more electricity to the German grid than did for fossil fuels. This is, a hugely noteworthy accomplishment by Germany, and it helps, we can understand it as Germany kind of illuminating a path for the rest of the modern industrialized world toward, a future that's low carbon without the need to burn the coal, oil, and gas at the volumes that we do today. The other way that we talk about the solar resource in northern New England is to look at this map from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. And what the map is expressing is the expected yield from a solar array anywhere in the United States. So we can see the different color gradations that show where you get a higher yield. We can look over here in Arizona and New Mexico and parts of Nevada and California, where we have the absolute highest solar resource and highest yield from a solar array. But here's that interesting dynamic regarding temperature, because I've circled most of our region in northern New England to illustrate the fact that a solar array in, say, Concord, New Hampshire, will yield roughly as much solar electricity per year as a solar array in Houston, Texas. And that's, again, because solar electric panels are more efficient and have higher output the cooler the temperatures are. So when it's 100 degrees in Texas and 80 degrees in Concord on, say, a day in July, you're actually getting a higher yield per square meter of solar panel in Concord than you do in Texas. So that's a benefit to northern New England. It helps explain how these churches and schools and nonprofits are deriving a strong economic and environmental return on a solar investment. It's because this resource up here in our neck of the woods is actually much stronger and more viable than people believe. And the other reason that we can count on a strong economic and environmental return on a solar investment is the fact that the cost of clean technology has really plummeted over the last 10, 20 years. In fact, this slide is showing from 2013 to 2023, so I need to update it. The updated slide would say that in the last 20 years, the cost of solar technology has actually dropped by 99%. But what I like about this graphic is that it's also showing how wind costs have plummeted, and also battery storage technology costs have plummeted. And that's crucial because we know that wind and solar, they're both intermittent sources of energy, which means we can't get solar electricity when the sun's not shining, and we can't get wind generated electricity when the wind's not blowing. But if we have batteries, we can fill those batteries with wind and solar power when the yield is high. And then when that intermittency kicks in and the sun goes down, we can fall back on the battery storage as our energy source. This is proving to be very effective in more and more places all around the world, and including in places in America that it might be counterintuitive, in places like Texas. So I love highlighting the fact that in 2024, more solar and more battery storage was installed in Texas than in any other state in the nation. Really an incredible accomplishment. We know that they're not all a bunch of tree huggers down there in Texas. And so this can help underscore the fact that the economics of solar and battery storage have become so compelling that even in more conservative places like Texas, we're seeing rapid, wide-scale adoption of the technology. I also want to just point out in this slide how poor, New Hampshire and other parts of northern New England are doing, and that's largely a result of the anti-renewable energy stance of the Sununu administration over the last 8 years. They have been vehemently anti-clean energy, and that's really put New Hampshire at a deep kind of deficit compared to the rest of the country in terms of a clean energy opportunity. And that's a shame up till now, but at least we know that going forward, there's a big chance to do things better in the Granite State, as well as the rest of New England and the other places where it's solar and clean tech is not proliferating.
Phil, I have a couple of questions there.
Yeah.
Hopefully they're quick ones. One is,
Yeah.
did you see any shift this past legislative session with Governor Ayotte and her admin?
No, unfortunately, Governor Ayotte has talked a pretty good game about being a clean energy supporter, but in reality, the New Hampshire legislature continues to be staunchly anti-clean energy, and they continue to refuse to pass more encouraging policies like you see today in Massachusetts, as well as in Maine, where solar is going a lot faster than it is in New Hampshire. But I also want to say that in the time, Lisa, since you and I put together this idea for a webinar on solar in northern New England for churches and schools and nonprofits, this policy landscape has shifted tectonically beneath our feet. And so Now that the Reconciliation Act has passed, I refuse to call it the big, 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 beautiful nothing. That Reconciliation Act is going to have a severe negative impact on clean energy progress in the United States, at least for the next 3+ years. And I just wanted to put this slide up for a second to highlight the reality that in America, fossil fuel subsidies began 112 years ago in 1913. And those fossil fuel subsidies continue to this day. And in fact, the Reconciliation Act is another gift to the fossil fuel industry. And if you look at the bottom of this graphic, the first renewable energy incentives or subsidies in America really got going in 2005 with George W. Bush's Energy Act, which introduced the 30% federal tax credit for solar and other clean technologies. And then the Inflation Reduction Act in 2022, which was the biggest piece of clean energy legislation in the history of the world. Unfortunately, the Reconciliation Act is going to completely unwind almost everything in the Inflation Reduction Act and put a big strain on this clean energy transition that has so many benefits to offer. And yet America is choosing to go in a different direction. And it's really indefensible to see this most recent gift to the fossil fuel industry. Over the last 50 years, the global fossil fuel industry has generated roughly 3 billion per day in profits, which has led to the creation of what I would say is a fossil fuel industry that has metastasized into a multi-trillion-dollar colossus that is now the most powerful entity on the face of the planet. It's also true that fossil fuels have powered the most profound advancement of the human species over the last 100 years. But at what cost to humans and the planet? And I think it's crucially important that we never forget fossil fuel related negative impacts, like say the Exxon Valdez disaster almost 2.5 decades ago, or the Deepwater Horizon disaster in 2016, and closer to our neck of the woods, the Lake Megantic horrific inferno that happened not quite a decade ago, just to our north in Canada. And so we have this legacy of fossil fuel pollution that continues to this day, and now we are doubling down on the investments and the things that are hurting the planet the most around the globe. And related to the negative impacts of fossil fuels, I think it's important for us to address things like the terminology that we're using to describe things that are going on. And I just want to flag for everybody who decides to pay attention to this content that the term climate change is a terrible descriptor for the impact of what's happening in the world today. Climate has changed since the dawn of time, and the climate of Earth is going to change until the end of times. And in that sense, the term climate change is a gift to the fossil fuel industry, because they say, of course, the climate is changing. It always has and always will. And that's why I'm trying to lead a crusade to pivot to more accurate descriptors like the term climate damage, which assigns accountability to the 8 billion people who are burning fossil fuels in Earth's closed atmosphere, knowing the damage that can result. And it also assigns accountability to companies like ExxonMobil, which knew more than 60 years ago from their own scientific research that their products would deeply damage Earth's biosphere and the climate and the environment that we all depend upon for survival. And so what you can see here is that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution about 100 years ago, we've now driven the normal kind of cyclical climate change, healthy changes where carbon dioxide fluctuated from about 200 to about 350 parts per million in the atmosphere. We've now reached 430 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This is a scary number, because we know that the long-term impacts of this type of concentration of greenhouse gases is causing the temperature of the earth to rise very rapidly, resulting in worsening storms and all sorts of negative impacts. So please stop using the term climate change and pivot to more accurate terms like climate damage. In addition to the harsh negative impacts of fossil fuels, they also have another huge Achilles heel, which is the fact that they're finite. We don't spend a lot of time talking about the fact that, coal, oil, and gas are ultimately going to run out. This is the work of a nonprofit research organization called Our World in Data, and they're illustrating that according to known reserves around the world, we have 140 years of coal left, about 56 years of oil, and about 50 years of gas. Those are very short timelines considering the fact that our population is on its way to about 10 billion by 2050, and global energy demand is expected to increase 50% beyond what we need today. And so we're going to need a lot of other solutions besides the traditional fossil fuels we've relied upon for so long.
So
despite
Phil,
all of these
quick question, Phil.
Yes,
on
go
the
ahead.
side. Is the solar and more broadly the renewable energy sector preparing for the time when there will not be fossil fuels to burn to generate new solar panels and all the associated tech required to make to build energy systems? Like, tell me there are folks
That's a great question,
for
Lisa.
whom
Yeah.
they're planning on that inevitability.
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, most of the companies in the clean tech and clean energy space are doing everything in their power to decarbonize their own operations, to model the change that we want to see in the world, and to show that we're drinking the Kool-Aid that we're offering to everybody else. And so at Revision Energy, for example, the reason that I call our 6 locations in New England, I call them our decarbonization facilities, because at each and every one, we're using solar energy, we're using air source heat pumps, we're using battery storage, and we're using electric vehicles to decarbonize our own operations while we deliver clean energy solutions to our clients across northern New England. And this is true for most of the clean tech sector. Most of the solar panel manufacturers around the world today are installing vast amounts of clean tech. And that's, I'm going to give a great example of that in a couple slides. So just give me a second there. But I just wanted to say, to introduce this slide, that the reason I'm cautiously optimistic about the future for humankind and the future of a clean energy transition, despite the Reconciliation Act, is the fact that in 2024, for the first time in history, more global capital flowed toward the clean energy transition than did capital investments toward fossil fuel exploration. This is a gigantic shift in the world's perspective, in how banks and other finance organizations are looking at where the best economic opportunity is going forward. And it also happens to be a social and economic opportunity, which is the clean energy transition is actually the biggest infrastructure project in the history of the planet. And infrastructure projects tend to result in incredible job creation and enormous economic activity. And so seeing that $2 trillion worth of capital flowed toward the clean energy transition in 2024 is a great signal for what's going to happen forward, even though in America, we're talking about taking a pretty big step backwards. But the follow-on question to this good news from this slide is, which countries, which people are going to benefit from the most from these new capital flows towards clean energy? And I think this is an interesting perspective. This comes from the Rocky Mountain Institute, and it's showing us the last 200 years on planet Earth and kind of global dominant superpowers. And we can see, we're describing at the top of the slide the transitions that were happening over the course of decades, led by the different global superpowers, and then the waves of innovation that have occurred through each era. And so in the early 1900s, you can see that America took over from colonial Great Britain. And we rose up as Thomas Edison invented the light bulb, and we captured the age of electricity, steel, and heavy engineering. And so for most of the 19th and certainly all of the 20th century, and even going into the 21st century, America has been the global innovative kind of dominant superpower. But in 1982, there was a really big moment in America when President Reagan literally pulled the solar panels off of the White House that the prior president, Jimmy Carter, had installed. And in 1982, Reagan announced to the world that America was going to double down on coal, oil, and gas. And in doing so, he pulled the plug on a clean energy industry in America that was in its infancy, just barely learning how to crawl. And he set the industry back by decades, basically until 2005 with the advent of George W. Bush's Energy Act. But in the 45 years since Reagan did that, there's one superpower on planet Earth that decided that this clean energy industry might actually be a great opportunity for somebody. And it's worth noting that China and its leadership, they think in dynastical terms, like 100+ year increments about what the future looks like. And in the 45 years since America abandoned clean energy, China has invested extraordinary amounts into a clean energy manufacturing industry that is now the global dominant superpower. Today, China controls more than 80% of global manufacturing capacity for wind turbines, for solar panels, for battery storage, and for electric vehicles. And I think that this is a dire national security and economic threat for America, because the future clearly needs a lot more energy. We know fossil fuels are finite and drastically polluting. And so China is capturing what could be one of the greatest economic and infrastructure opportunities in the last, say, 50 years. And you can really see this evidenced by what's happening on the mainland in China and around the world as well. This graph is showing us that in 2023, China installed more solar on its mainland than the entire rest of the world combined. 67% more than the entire rest of the world combined. It's almost an incomprehensible volume. And here's another way to look at China's dominance. This is now how much electricity per year China is generating, and you can see how much per year the United States is generating. And when you think about the advent of artificial intelligence and the need for vast amounts of new electricity generation to meet these power-hungry data centers to run AI in America and around the globe, China clearly has a huge advantage. And the takeaway from this slide is to just hear this for 1 second. In May of 2025, China installed more solar on its mainland than the United States did in all of 2024. In 1 month, they doubled what we did in an entire year, and yet we're now deciding to go backwards on this front. And so I'm informing all of you who are watching this to say that it's not just churches, schools, and nonprofits that need clean energy. It's the entire US economy. And so we have to find ways to reject this reconciliation bill that's going to hurt the incentives so badly. The good news is that the drop in the cost of clean technology does give us a pathway to being able to continue our clean energy transition without incentives, because the lower cost of the technology continues to make the numbers attractive for investors, even if you don't have a 30% federal tax credit. Further evidence of China's dominance, I'm sorry to belabor this point, in 2024 and in the first quarter of 2025, for the first time in history, China's CO2 emissions are dropping despite their increasing demand for energy. And also really exciting to say that in Q1 of 2025, China's burning of coal fell by 5%. And you'll often hear from the fossil fuel industry kind of this red herring that, why should America clean up its act when China and India are going to continue to pollute the environment with fossil fuels? Well, the reality is that China and other places like India are onboarding clean energy faster than the United States is today. Further evidence of what other countries are doing in 2024, about this time of last year, China's EV sales reached 50% of all vehicles sold, while over here in America, we're fighting about who's going to force what technology down someone's throat. And so it begs the question, why is China so bullish on all of this clean energy, including electric cars? Well, it's not that complicated. The average internal combustion engine vehicle is about 15% efficient. That means when you put a gallon of gas in an internal combustion engine automobile, about 15% of the original energy in the fuel goes towards propulsion of the vehicle. Conversely, in an electric car, about 85% of the electrons in the battery go toward propulsion, and the remaining 15% is lost in the transfer of the energy from the battery to the vehicle's motors and the inversion of the power from DC to AC. The other kind of big hindrance in America, besides our failed policy around clean energy, is the fact that we're sleepwalking and pretending that internal combustion engines are benign because we can't see the problem that's right in front of us. Everyone loves clean air, but in America, we're clinging to this fantasy that the average car is benign because we can't see greenhouse gas emissions. But the reality is we have 1 billion cars on the roads globally and about 250 million cars on the road in America. And every single one of those internal combustion engine automobiles, they're doing this. They're polluting like crazy. But our catalytic converter technology makes that carbon and greenhouse gas emission pollution invisible to us. And so we've lost kind of that tangible relationship to what's happening when we turn the key in the ignition. This is not what's happening. This is what's happening. And it's important for folks in New England to know that more than 50% of our greenhouse gas emissions in New England come from tailpipe emissions. So if you're still driving an internal combustion engine auto, it's really the time to switch. Go ahead, Lisa.
Phil, are you saying that the catalytic converter doesn't actually do anything to remove or chemically transform the pollutants?
It does not. Carbon dioxide is a tasteless, odorless, colorless gas that flies right through the catalytic converter. They're trying to take out things like I think sulfur oxide and other types of pollutants, metals, but it does not really reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And so just to belabor the point, study after study clearly shows us that electric vehicles are much lower emitting than electric vehicles. Electric vehicles are much lower emitting than combustion vehicles. So if you don't believe that, then you just need to pay attention to the science. The other thing that we hear about these electric vehicles is the fact that the batteries have problems. And it's true that mining for some of the rare earth metals that we need for lithium ion batteries, for example, cobalt coming out of the Congo is often harvested by child slave labor and adult slave labor. Those are hugely problematic issues. The good news is we've discovered that in the Great Salt Lake Basin here in America, we have more than enough lithium to replace every one of those 250 million cars on the road in America. So we actually have pretty much all of the battery minerals that we need in America to transition away from the internal combustion engine automobile. It's just going to take us a number of years to get at those metals and successfully mine them. The other good news about electric vehicles, battery materials, is these batteries are 90 to 95% recyclable. And so when an electric vehicle reaches end of life, we can basically heat up and break down these batteries and separate the various metals and then reconstitute another battery. And so they have a circular economy potential that you never get with burning fossil fuels. You know, you burn a gallon of gas, it's gone for 300 million years until we can form another one. So great advantages for all of the clean tech out there, including the batteries that we use. But the reality is, lithium ion batteries are not going to be able to solve all of the intermittency problems related to wind and solar. For example, if it's February in northern New England and we have a nor'easter come through our region, there won't be enough wind and solar to keep the lights on in places like the city of Boston. And not everybody's going to be able to have a battery in their building or their apartment. And so we're going to need big offsite types of storage. Well, back in 2021, Jeff Bezos, he made a prediction that the world's cheapest storage will be iron air batteries. And if you've never heard of an iron air battery, I'm just going to pause for a second, take a drink of water, and let you read for yourself how this incredible technology works. Go ahead and take a quick look at this slide. And the great news about iron air storage is that it uses one of the most abundant and cheapest metals on Earth, which is iron, and then it uses air, which we have an awful lot of. And so Form Energy is the pioneer of this technology. They came out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And here you're looking at the opening of their plant down in West Virginia. And since that plant was opened, it's been announced that Form Energy is going to build the world's biggest battery. It'll be an iron air battery at the site of a former paper mill in Lincoln, Maine. And so this project is scheduled to be completed by 2028. It'll be the not only the largest battery storage in New England, but the largest in the world. But in the meantime, while we wait for that technology to come along, there's actually another technology that exists today that's even bigger in terms of its storage potential. And this is the biggest one on the planet. It's called pumped hydro energy storage. This one's on the Yangtze River in China. The storage capacity here is 6.6 billion kilowatt hours. That's enough electricity to power 100,000 Maine homes for an entire year, just to give you a sense of the scale. And right now, the largest battery of any sort that exists in New England is a pumped hydro facility at this place called North Mountain in, I think it's Northfield, Massachusetts. And right here, we're looking at the pumps of this pumped hydro facility. And if you look to the left where the cables are over here in the image and the wall behind it, that's actually the inner rock of this mountain in Massachusetts where this facility is located. And to give you a sense of how pumped hydro works, it requires two bodies of water. So imagine a really large, imagine a drinking reservoir in Massachusetts, for example, or a very large pond or even a small lake. And so you have a lower reservoir and then an upper reservoir at elevation, and they're connected by a really large pipe, which is called a penstock. And embedded in the penstock is a pump and a turbine. And so when the wind and solar electricity are cranking out a lot of energy on a beautiful, bright, sunny day when the wind is blowing strong, you use all of that renewable intermittent electricity to run the pump in the penstock, and you pump the water from the lower reservoir all the way into the upper reservoir, and then you store it there. And then when the sun goes down or the wind stops blowing and you need that energy back, you release the water from the upper reservoir, it rushes down through the penstock and turns the turbine and generates electricity. So this is a massive scale type of technology. You saw this really big one. There's the largest battery in New England is pumped hydro in Massachusetts. And then here's the really kind of extra sweet aspect of this technology. A few years ago, the Australian National University did a study of the world's potential for pumped hydro energy storage. And so they mapped Earth's hydrology, where all the water exists, and then the Earth's topography, where all the height of land and elevation exists. And what they discovered was 616,000 locations on Earth where you have enough water and enough elevation where pumped hydro storage is likely to be viable. What this equates to is it's 100 times more energy storage than what would be needed right now today to take the entire world off of fossil fuels and onto intermittent wind and solar combined with pumped hydro storage. And so I use this type of data to emphatically answer the question whether or not we actually have the tools that we need to transition away from fossil fuels. And yes, we absolutely have those tools today. And the way I see it from my front row seat at Revision Energy is that I'm living through and witnessing a tipping point in history. And so here's a great historical example of a tipping point. And I'm going to show you ones related to clean energy other than this one. So here's 1900 New York City. The first Model T internal combustion engine automobile came off the assembly line in 1908. If we fast forward to 1913 New York City, we see this radical disruption of technology, switching from the horse and buggy to the automobile, and this radical switch from hay and water as the fuel over to gasoline. And this type of head-snapping tipping point and transition is happening all over the world in places you may not be aware of. In fact, we now have 87 countries around the world that have passed the so-called 5% tipping point of clean energy penetration into their economy, leading to widespread adoption. China is one of those leading countries. But I'm seeing it not only in places like China, I'm seeing it in California, the world's fourth largest economy. They've now reduced gas consumption by 40% from 2023 to 2024. And they're continuing to reduce it. Places like Portugal have run their entire country's electrical grid for 6 days on renewable energy combined with energy storage. And then you see these really mind-blowing technology advancements like this mining truck from Switzerland. So this is a 100% electric mining truck. It never gets plugged in for a charge because while it's descending through the switchbacks down into the mine, the regenerative braking harvests all of the friction and converts it into electricity and stuffs it into the truck's battery, giving it enough electricity to not only climb back out of the mine with a full load, but also export excess electricity to the grid. And just to give you a sense of the scale of these mining trucks, they're just jaw-droppingly gigantic. This one came through an announcement from the world's largest mining company, which is called Fortescue. They just ordered 400 of these electric mining trucks so that they can save an extraordinary amount of money by not having to buy diesel to power these types of devices, but also to drastically shrink their carbon footprint. And we have all kinds of other technology examples. We have electric snowplows in places like Scandinavia. You'll hear in northern New England, we can never do this type of stuff with electric vehicles, but Scandinavia is already doing it. We already have things like electric excavators that can be used to fill up those giant electric mining trucks. We have electric 18-wheelers that have already gone 1 million miles in the pilot phase as we prove the technology. Pretty soon we'll be seeing these kind of autonomous 18-wheelers, 100% electric, reducing the risk of accidents, but also reducing emissions across America and the rest of the world. We have electric industrial agriculture, and companies like John Deere are seeing the future and starting to build the technology that can decarbonize big, heavy industries like industrial agriculture. We're now pioneering things like agrivoltaics, where we can combine crop growing with energy production. This is a farm in Colorado where they installed solar panels to increase their revenue income streams for the farm. But what they discovered was the intermittent shading of the crops from the solar panels actually causes the crops to grow about 20% better. And now there's been a study that shows if we converted all of the world's known agricultural lands to this dual use of agrivoltaics, we could generate 100% of the global energy demand that we have today. So very exciting opportunities there. We can also graze livestock when we're generating electricity. There's a little humor in this slide, which is you'll never see a goat on one of our solar farms in the future. We discovered that these goats will climb up on the back of the solar panel and eat all of the wires. They think that the plastic and copper taste good, so they're no longer welcome, but the sheep are wonderful guests. In other innovations, we're seeing like, former big polluters like big box stores. This is the first net positive Target store in America. I think it's down in North Carolina. And those on-site solar arrays generate more electricity per year than what the store needs on an annual basis. And so the solar panels during the daytime, they'll make enough electricity for the lights and cash registers in the stores, and the excess gets exported to the grid. And then at night, when the store can't generate its own power, it draws down the credits that it provided to the grid during the day. I also want to highlight the solar parking canopies. These are crucial. We lay down all these dead dinosaurs in the form of asphalt so we can park our cars, but they're horrible urban heat sinks. The black asphalt, it absorbs the sun's energy all day long and gets really hot, and then it regurgitates that heat into the atmosphere. When we shade the asphalt, we keep it nice and cool so it doesn't become a heat sink. We also provide shelter to the drivers. We provide places to charge electric vehicles, and we eliminate the need for snow plowing in places like New England. So we see a lot of this type of technology in Massachusetts, where there are good incentives for solar parking canopies. You see none of it, almost none of it, in New Hampshire. We have done one nice solar parking canopy at the Oyster River School in New Hampshire, but you don't see it in New Hampshire because there's no encouraging policy. So hopefully Governor Ayotte and the legislature will come to their senses eventually. Other wildly unexpected clean technology is the fact that a company called Beta Technologies over in Bennington, Vermont, has already built the world's first electric airplanes. This plane has flown across the country in 200-mile spurts, and we've installed the first electric plane charging station at the Manchester airport. We're very excited to announce that we installed another electric plane charger at the airport, the Jetport in Portland. And so we're making it possible now to do short hop electric plane flights in northern New England. Maybe you need to get from New Hampshire down to Logan. Well, why burn fossil fuels when you can just take an electric plane? And we expect to see those flights being commercially available in, say, 5 years or less. And then I'm going to kind of quickly wrap up here. We're getting to the end of our hour, but I just wanted to say that this clean energy transition, when we started Revision Energy 22 plus years ago, we had to draw our vision for the future because the technology was not here to accomplish what we wanted to do, and it was not cost effective. So long ago, we created this graphic back when solar electric panels were way too expensive for anybody to really afford, except for the ultra rich. We drew this before batteries were available. We did it before air source heat pumps worked down to minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit, and before any electric vehicles were viable as a replacement for internal combustion engine autos. If you fast forward to today, Revision Energy is building these 100% solar powered and clean tech homes multiple times a week throughout Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. This home down in Durham, New Hampshire, you've got the solar electric panels on the roof. The red heart is showing you the air source heat pump ductwork so that you burn no fossil fuels for heating and cooling. You got the electric car in the driveway, and then we've got the battery storage down in the basement. And the reason that we're doing this more and more as every day and every week goes by is the fact that the value proposition is irresistible for folks. On this graph of the 25-year cost of energy for an average homeowner, The most expensive option on the far left is if you just keep on buying fossil fuels, maybe as you have done historically. The bar graph in the middle, that shows you a traditional home that has been converted to clean energy and allowing homeowners to cut their energy costs by at least half. And then the lowest cost option is a high performance home. And that means that you've completely insulated and weatherproofed and upgraded all the windows so that you have a high performance home, and that ratchets down your energy costs to the lowest common denominator. And makes it so that you're almost spending nothing compared to what you would for the traditional fossil fuel approach. And so this is spurring widespread adoption throughout New England. And in fact, it's allowing us to now build new communities from the ground up without a drop of fossil fuels being combusted and without any, oil boilers or internal combustion engine automobiles. This is the Hillside Sustainable Living Development down in Newburyport, Massachusetts. You can see the solar powered homes in the background, the solar parking canopies here in the foreground. And so it's wonderful now that we can just go right out of the gate without any fossil fuels. And so I'm going to wrap up here really briefly. I've gone on for a long time and I appreciate your time and attention, but I just wanted to announce that, in 2015, Revision Energy became a certified B Corp because we wanted independent outside verification that we're intentionally operating our business to be a force for good in the world. And in 2017, we converted Revision Energy to 100% employee ownership because we want to be an antidote to the winner take all version of capitalism, so terribly kind of exemplified by today's fossil fuel industry. We're 100% employee owned because we want to more equitably share the success and the profits of the company with every single person who's making it happen, instead of just concentrating that wealth in the hands of a few company owners or shareholders. And so this is a long-winded way of saying our company mission is to make life better by building our just and equitable electric future. And the little graphic here with the sit-go sign is to poke a little fun at that fossil fuel industry and say, hey, you better watch out, we're coming for you. And we see a future that is cheaper, cleaner, and better for everyone. And I'll just show one of our school-based projects here briefly, and then this is a food bank that we did a few years ago, similar to how we do churches and schools and other nonprofits. And then finally, if anyone would like to get in touch with me, my email address is at the bottom here, phil@revisionenergy.com. And you can find all the information about what we do for schools, nonprofits, and churches on our website, www.revisionenergy.com. Thank you so much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Phil. This has been an extraordinary, deep journey in 1 hour. I'm sitting here just so filled up with incredible information, but also inspiration and energy to share the amazing work that Revision is offering faith communities. The structure of Revision Energy is so incredibly aligned with Jesus's ministry. He was certainly in opposition to greed and empire and the whole philosophical as well as practical way in which Revision has structured itself is just 100% in alignment with fairness, equity, and justice for all creatures. Your work is so extraordinary, and the good that Revision is doing while also delivering living wages and fairness is just really extraordinary. And I cannot thank you enough for this incredible presentation. And the Council of Churches is very excited to be able to connect you with congregations, and hopefully folks will once again be reminded This is not the first time that Revision has done a presentation for the Council of Churches, but it takes many touches. We know from market research that you need to touch someone somewhere or an entity somewhere between 7 and 20 times to get them to take that first step
Yes.
to working toward change.
Yeah. Let me just close with a quick announcement, Lisa. I do want to say that I am looking for opportunities to deliver my presentation. And so if if you have an upcoming online or even better, an in-person gathering where you will have as many people as possible in the audience, I'm very much interested to come and be in community with people and share this information and also answer questions at the end. So please keep that in mind. I'm gonna have to sign off now and say au revoir until the next time we have the opportunity to connect, and thank you for this opportunity.
Great. And Phil, please hit stop recording for us. There, did you hit stop recording? Because you are the host. So we need you to hit that button.